I think a lot of times material goods serve, they're proxies for relationships that we have with control or fantasy or privacy or fear. This relationship, I think, with things, the role they play in our lives, how we use them, how we forget about them, how we rediscover them is really interesting.
Welcome back to The Materialist. I'm your host, Mark Bridge, the founder and CEO of At Present, Matchmaker to Extraordinary Jewelry. And today we're kicking off Season 2 with someone who embodies everything we love about style, storytelling, and curiosity, Heather Hurst. Heather is a personal stylist, a writer, and a content creator whose unique perspective on material culture, collecting, and self-adornment has captivated audiences across social media. From her early days in public health to building a thriving career in the world of fashion and vintage, Heather's journey is anything but ordinary. We dive into the art of collecting, the power of curiosity, and what it really means to be a materialist. Whether it's a mohair coat that sparks conversation or a long-lost turquoise ring that still haunts her, Heather's take on objects and identity is insightful, funny, and always thought-provoking. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to The Materialist. Welcome back to The Materialist. I have the pleasure of kicking off Season 2 today with a great friend of the brand, Heather Hurst.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Heather. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of the At Present tribe. To start, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and how we have gotten to know you?
Sure. It's been a winding journey. Funny enough, At Present is one of the first brands I ever connected with when I pivoted career-wise, which is crazy because we've only actually met in person just recently, but the past is storied. I've done a lot of things. I studied public health actually in college. I wanted to be a nutritionist. And then when I left college, I worked in a lab in scientific operations. The pandemic happened and we were all at home and I was craving, I think as a lot of people were, like a material or tactile experience because we couldn't leave the house anymore. So I capitalized on wanting to start a vintage business, which is something that I'd always dreamed of. So I was doing that, started making content online.
What is a vintage business?
Reselling vintage, curating.
Jewelry,
yes.
Furniture.
Yeah, clothing and home, we are limited by space parameters. We tried to collect as much as we could, but mostly clothing and jewelry, shoes, bags, really anything to adorn yourself with. I was shopping a lot on the auctions and was like refurnishing my parents' house a little bit from that, and we had some excess inventory, and then it just spiraled into a business. So I was doing that, and I was also staging homes for real estate agents and then making content online, and then was lucky enough that I was able to pivot that into a career as my time at the lab was ending. And now we're here, and I live in New York, and I'm a personal stylist and a writer, and I make content and get to talk to people like you.
You have such an interesting path, it seems, because you're this interesting mix of deeply intentional and, my sense is, open to serendipity. And we were just talking before we came on here about the importance of being in the moment. And as we're at the beginning of the year, do you set goals? Do you make plans? How do you think about the balance between those things? How, does the path unfold in an intentional way or?
Well, I think planning, it's necessary pragmatically as like a survival instinct. I do need to know where the food's coming from and how the lights are going to stay on. But I do like to be open to opportunity. I think curiosity, especially in style, is something that drives me. I've been lucky enough to be able to navigate interests and opportunities and build them into something, which I think is really exciting. I don't know, you and I were talking over our coffee about the idea of permanence and ephemerality. And I think holding on and letting go is just a dance that we do our entire lives. And knowing when to let go. I thought I would work in science for a long time. My dream was to work at the CDC. That didn't work out. I worked at a different lab, and that sort of pivoted me to the next step. I met a lot of interesting people when I worked in the lab. I promise this comes back to jewelry.
We like meanders. Meanders are okay.
I like to take the long way around. Pat Brown, the creator of Impossible Foods, had worked at my workspace. We didn't have any time overlapping when I was there, but he had revisited our workspace to come back and talk about how he created this thing. And I think everything that any scientist in my work would talk about is curiosity, he had this idea, what if we could make something that smelled and tasted and felt like meat, but wasn't meat? And what does that look like? And I think that's the same curiosity that imbues any creative process or making something. And living is also a creative process, and making a life is. So if you can open yourself up to curiosity and wondering, how can reality look different than what I thought it could be, is another way of creating. So I like to be open to those experiences and those processes. And I think I read an interesting design book recently about how you don't necessarily start the process to get to the destination, but you start the process to learn the next thing that opens your eyes to something else. And then you go down, explore those little detours and see what happens.
Where do you think that curiosity came from? Was that something that came from your parents? Was that something that came from exploration as a child? Were you out, walking in the forest, picking up bugs?
I think I was actually a really lame and scared, cautious kid. I was telling Mark before we got on the podcast that I was afraid of Heelys or anything that kids would typically like. Very cautious and very reserved. But I think as I've aged, inadvertently, I see how things tie back to the way that my parents are. In both ways, I think they've contributed to my curiosity. My dad is very intellectually curious. He was a naval historian. He wears the same thing every day. He doesn't own any jewelry, and he wears Costco jeans and the same vintage Guinness t-shirt. My mom is a school teacher and a principal, but she's definitely more where I get the magpie material impulses from. Both of us are collectors. I grew up thrifting all the time, and I think that experience offered a lot of curiosity to me. A lot of kids at school were wearing the exact same thing, so going to thrift and having to imprint of what you're trying to go for, especially as a kid, where you want to fit in an environment where you're not pulling from things that are what all the other kids have. I think that taught me a lot about curiosity and finding your own way to see things in the world. It's not something, I guess, until recently that I would credit back to my parents, but I'm sure they'd be happy to hear that their academic interests have contributed to my journey.
Well, they've had some impact on your life. When you say magpie, we think about somebody who's, drawn to shiny things.
Yeah.
Are you drawn to the look of something? Are you drawn to the idea of something? Are you drawn to the story of something, the craft of it? What does it mean to be a materialist to you? And I guess maybe I should ask first, would you describe yourself as a materialist?
That's a great question. I think unequivocally, yes. And I think everybody in my life would say the same. Anything else would be diluted. But I think that when I was younger, I thought, I guess the way also, consumer culture and media, especially in the advent of social media and the abundance of it. When I was younger, I definitely was more focused on the look of something, the appearance of something, perhaps the societal value or currency of that thing. But I think as I've gotten older, I use the look of something, that spark of curiosity, as a reason to develop that thing further. So, for example, I've started to get a curiosity into why I'm so obsessed with gold versus silver. And I've learned really interesting histories about gold comes from the explosion of supernovas, and it represents yellow in the sun. And people used to worship the sun and kill for this beautiful, shiny thing, which kind of ties back to what you always talk about in the episode. Why do we want what we want? Why do we make things? Why are we obsessed with whether things are beautiful or grotesque or scary or odd? So I think, yes, on first glance, I'm always drawn to why something looks the way it does, and appearance is alluring. But anything that makes me want to dig further or ask why is usually most exciting or most satisfying over the long term.
Can you think back to the first thing you became obsessed with?
Oh, broad question. I guess I'll answer for jewelry because that's the at present way. My mom gave me a sterling silver ring that she got on Southwestern travels. Her biological mom used to take her on adventures out west. They grew up in Ohio and they would go out west and explore, and her mom got her a sterling silver ring with a turquoise heart in it, and I lost it at sleepaway camp. The first year that I ever had it, I left it at the sink when I was washing my hands. I should have just kept it on, but I didn't know at the time that water wouldn't melt the ring. And somebody took it when I left the bathroom. I came back and it was gone. And I think about that all the time.
How old were you?
Probably 11.
Yeah.
And my mom was so nice about it. She was like, it was probably $40. I got it when I was a kid. It's okay. But I remember that being an obsession. That's still something I remember so intensely, whereas other things have come and gone and I've forgotten about t-shirts that I've lost in college or things like that. But that ring I still think about all the time. And I guess it also just represents that obsession with storytelling, or something having a greater meaning than the way that it looks, has been a through line in my collecting.
What did it feel like when she gave that to you? Was that the first significant piece that was yours?
I think it was, but honestly, and I think a lot of the way my collection has gone, the moment I get it is not always the most satisfying. I think growing with the thing is satisfying, or it changing meaning over time is satisfying, which is also why I like jewelry so much. This is a tangential. We're offshooting. But I like that as you grow, bodies change, you gain or lose weight. Clothing has a lot of difficulties with things like the weather or your climate, where you live, practicality. But jewelry sort of transcends all of those difficulties, and you can layer it and remix it in different stages of life. So I feel like the ring honestly is probably more meaningful to me now that I don't have it than it was when she gave it to me. I probably honestly thought nothing of it when she was like, thanks, Mom, and then started wearing it. And the more it became part of my daily routine and part of my style, losing it was so much more painful.
What was the first significant thing you bought for yourself?
I think a collection, probably my charm collection. I have a series of gold charms. The cheating answer because there's multiple of them. But I think that journey that I started maybe 2 years ago is the most significant, just because I also think it represents that growth. And they're things that I maybe don't wear every single day, but I find ways to reimagine them. I'll clip them onto a bag. I have a little sterling silver comb that I use as a bookmark in my journal, and sometimes I'll attach a charm to there. Or they're like little talismans and amulets I just carry with me. Sometimes I don't wear a necklace, but I'll just put one in my bag just to have if I want to throw it on later. And so I think my charm collection, starting to build that a few years ago, they're all solid gold. They're super small and they feel insignificant. It's something you could lose, easily down like a subway sewer grate. But just having one on me makes me feel secure for the day. And I like that they're like a malleable thing you can change. There's not just one way to use it or to have it. And sometimes I honestly just like playing with them. They're like adult toys. They all have little shapes. And I think one of the first ones I ever got was a Snoopy, who's one of my favorite childhood characters.
What would you tell somebody that you met on a subway or on a plane that you do?
Ooh, it honestly depends how I'm feeling that day. I don't know if that makes me sound like a psychopath or a compulsive liar or something, but I guess whatever I'm doing in that moment is what I would tell them that I do. If there's a project I'm really excited about, I might tell them that I'm a writer and a researcher. If I'm researching something exciting, if I'm making a video I'm really excited about, I might tell them about that. Anything that impassions me. But I'll usually say writer and content creator, personal stylist.
My sense is you have been able to carve out this really interesting niche due to I don't even know what you describe it as, platform world, content landscape, media realm that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. Is that fair?
I think, yeah, that's completely fair. That's true and accurate, that this was not something that I intended to do something completely different. I do think that in a way, what I would like to do, what I'm striving for, what I've started to do in the last few years is something that has always existed: journalism, research, curiosity. I wouldn't consider myself a journalist or a researcher at present, but something that I'm building towards, and that has existed. But the way that I've been able to fall into that is completely new.
And who is the audience for that?
Maybe this is unique to me, but I get the sense, because I've met multiple members of my audience and I talk to a lot of people over DM, there's a lot of different personalities that constitute who consumes my content. There's one woman I love. Her name is Deborah. She lives in California. Deborah. Hi, Deborah. I hope she's listening to this, but we DM all the time and she's fabulous. She owns horses and has all these fun sons and a really maximalist house and is this larger than life personality. I also know that I have some younger audience members, maybe women that are 18 or 19, trying to start the process of building themselves as an adult and self-discovery, whether that means building a jewelry collection or figuring out what they want to do with their career, and really everybody in between. I think it's somebody who's curious and excited. I think my audience would be anybody who's excited about collecting and stuff, and they're maybe a little bit voyeuristic into other people's stuff.
We think about digital platforms in terms of finding communities of people who are like-minded or people who have kind of interests in certain areas. But you have this sort of polyglottic interest. You have more of, I would describe, kind of an attitudinal approach, right? This is not like, all right, I am the world's leading scholar of a particular watch brand or a particular artist, or I love wrestling. But it seems almost like an outlook, right? Is that fair?
I think, yeah. I think that it's one of those things where you think you want to be an expert at something and then you explore other things and you realize how many maybe it's an inability to deal with the fact that I won't be able to live all the lives that I want to live. And so I want to explore a taste of everything. And I think the idea towards like-mindedness and cultivating an audience is also interesting. I don't want to meet more people like me. I would like to meet people that I know nothing about that spark, whether that's outrage or curiosity or confusion or boredom. I wrote about this in a Substack the other week, but I think it's just that's the only way that you get to live twice, through reading and meeting different people, is interesting. So I also like to maintain that inability to be captured or understood too, because I also don't want to get bored with myself.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned recently?
Ooh. This is completely unrelated to jewelry. It was about transit systems in China. And I just have been really into watching these videos of this guy who his morning commute every day in China and what that looks like. And he goes down multiple flights of stairs, like 20 or 30 flights of stairs. And the train that he takes to work passes through the centers of buildings. And the train exits on the 41st floor above most of the city. And then he has to take an elevator all the way down to reach ground level to reach his office. And I just thought that was really interesting. It's completely different than the hidden underground subway system that I'm used to taking here. And I think that most of the content I consume, I relate all of it back to clothing, just because I think the way we adorn ourselves says a lot about like where we've been and what we're interested in and how we want to express ourselves in that moment. And I think it's fun that you don't have to define your aesthetic and you can use the same materials but exist still ephemerally. Your perspective gained from just seeing a new way of living can change the way that you present yourself, even with the same materials.
Tell us about your collections. What was the first thing that you started collecting, and what are you excited about collecting now?
Oh, stamps and scrapbooking, I think, was my first collection. I used to scrapbook everything when I was little.
Postage stamps?
Was really into archiving. Stamps, rubber carving stamps. I used to carve my own stamps and make scrapbooks. And I still like that to an extent. I keep a journal chronologically every year. I have about maybe 7 finished journals now since I was like 11. And now it's evolved, unsurprisingly, into bags, shoes, jewelry are my main collections. I also have stuffed animals. I have a few vintage Paddingtons and random things from eBay. We have a paper mache cat who I named Ferdinand, who dutifully watches over my room. But yeah, I really like collecting anything that is a lot of little things. I have an annoying story of where I got it or how I outbid somebody on eBay or used Auction Sniper or made my mom drive 100 miles with me in Florida to go pick it up from some guy's truck. I like the adventure that comes with things. That was an example, but my mom and my aunt and I are all crazy in the same way. And when you bid on auction, sometimes there's a pickup option. So my dad would always make fun of us. He'd ask what we were doing that day, and it would be a Saturday, and we'd say, oh, we have to go to U-Haul and pick up our minivan because we need to go pick up an etagere from Lorton, Virginia. And he's like, where's that going to go? We're like, I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get home. And we'd come home and be painting these. Figure it out. Yeah. We're like, we have a lot of time in the car to think about it. I like just hunting things down. I like meeting random people. One of my friends is a jewelry designer, and she uses a lot of dead stock materials. Her company is called Don't Let Disco, and she's a beater in Brooklyn. And she also has the same ethos because she uses dead stock materials. Sometimes people will pass away, or she'll meet with people's estates and inherit materials that way. And it's so fun to say, well, you can go buy a bunch of plastic discs or whatever new from some maker, but when you get something that was passed down from somebody, maybe they used to work with Dieter Rams, and these were actually parts that were used in an air conditioning unit years ago, and now they're being reimagined into a necklace. It's such an interesting conversation to be able to have with somebody versus here's the link on Amazon to where I bought this.
You were talking about, obsession with coats and bags.
Yes.
What is it about those things that intrigue you?
I think the idea of self-adornment, but also ephemerality and chameleoning is maybe a core tenet of my style. I think I have a Jekyll and Hyde thing where sometimes I feel super bold and impassioned and empowered. Another friend of both Mark and I and the podcast, Jaleel Johnson, I think encapsulates a bold energy all the time. And there are some people that I really admire their consistency in that way. But I think I can be a little inconsistent, or maybe just have multiple versions of myself that I switch between. And so I like the idea that a coat is something you wear that's also shed when you arrive at your destination. So you can flip-flop between these versions of yourself very easily. Committing to wearing a gold lame dress for the whole day is maybe not something I always feel like doing, but having a crazy bag, it's this extension of yourself that can sit next to you, and it's not so loud or so bold, and you can decide like how much of a role you want that to play in your presentation, which I really like.
Who did you decide you wanted to be when you woke up this morning?
Ooh, well, it was early for me. I wanted to be cozy. I was feeling a little spry and simple. I don't know where the video will be shared, but I'm wearing a green wool coat. I have a giant earring on from Cynthia Rowley as a brooch that I just fastened over the button of my coat because I think this button is ugly and I wanted to cover it up. And then just some pointy-toed boots. I like when I walk uptown to wear a heeled boot because I like the sound of the clacking on the sidewalk. I don't know what it is. Every time I'm uptown, I have to wear like a heel or a clacky shoe.
So do you think about that in terms of geography? You're like, all right, I'm coming to the Upper East Side today. I'm going to be that woman today.
I think a little bit, yeah. Not so much as like a cloaking or a performance, like a desire to assimilate with the destination that I'm going, but it's like, who am I when I'm in this place?
Yeah.
Is something I do think about a little bit. I think it's fun to play into the character, and in New York, it's such a great place to have that opportunity to consider and imbue different versions of yourself.
I like it. It's one of the reasons, for those who don't know, I live in Seattle, which is not a very formal place, which is not a place that, at least on its face, pays much attention to how you look. If you're wearing a recent vintage Arc'teryx, that's like, high fashion in Seattle. So I don't know. It's fun for me to come here and to get dressed up. I actually like to get dressed up in Seattle because it's almost a little bit provocative there. It's like, if you're wearing a button-down shirt, people would ask you at work, like, oh, are you interviewing for something today? And I don't know, like when I drop my kids off at school, like, I don't know, I'll wear a blazer and a nice pair of shoes and people look at you differently. I don't know, that's sort of a geographic thing, but I do think there's some intentionality in, how do I want to angle toward the world?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to curate different perspectives of yourself. I think a lot of people think of a wardrobe or a collection as like the final destination, that once you've created that, you continue in a cycle of being the same person, that like curating is the act. But I think that it's really using and curating different perspectives within your collection is a way to continue that creativity after you've purchased things and using different things. My aunt has lived here for 20 years and she famously says the opposite. We'd go to Le Jardinier or something for lunch and she would wear a screen printed t-shirt of her dog and just not even care. And I think that really speaks to her boldness and the way that she carries herself, that she will be herself wherever she goes and do whatever she wants. And it's very much her attitude, versus I clearly like maybe the theatrics of my environment and playing into that in a tongue-in-cheek way more than she does.
And how much is the reaction? We were talking about a really fun mohair jacket that you were wearing and the way in which people respond to that. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, this coat specifically is just a gray long mohair coat that I got on eBay. And I was telling Mark that I don't know what it is about this specific coat, but men always comment on it. It's not flirtatious. It's not a come on. It's just a constant noticing of the coat. And I need to do some sort of, there has to be an anthropological reason for this or something. I don't know if it's because it looks like a caveman loin or it's some sort of like primal protective thing that's speaking to them, but
it's like I do jewelry Chewbacca.
Yeah, I do like to keep track of who comments on what or what people notice, because I think that's interesting. Actually, the same thing with my bag as well. I'm wearing this leather looped, get it in the video for Lauren's sake. I'm wearing this leather looped bag that I love today from Bottega, and on New Year's as well, lots of men were grabbing it and wanting to hold it and touch it and stick their fingers in the loops of it. And I think there's something interesting in that way. That's when you can interact with other people's clothing or there's a texture or something that's alluring to you. It's, I don't know. I see people on the subway sometimes and a bag is usually a siren song. I will stare at it the whole time until they get off the train.
And some people strike up conversation and some people just stare at it.
Yeah, I do the same thing. So I can't, sometimes you don't have anything to say. You just want to look at it. You want to be able to be there and experience it and just enjoy something beautiful or something strange.
There is part of your life that you live in the public sphere. You exist, in the metaverse, in the ether. What has the experience of that been like?
Really strange. I think also as it pertains to consumer behavior, perception of a collection, especially with, this gets into sort of the responsibility of like influencer culture and influencing people to buy certain things or the effect that your consumption has on other people. I think it's really strange to grapple with the perception of how you use your things, or I get a lot of questions about, oh, you're wearing this thing differently than you did, or I don't notice that you're wearing this thing as much as you used to, or did you get rid of this thing? I don't see it anymore. And I think that idea of like visibility in a collection is really interesting because I'll keep things for a really long time. I have a hard acrylic shell bag that I bought in 2017 in London that I don't think I've really ever shown on my online platforms, but it's one of my favorite things that I own. I wear it pretty often if I go out, and for whatever reason, it's just eschewed any like recording or photograph. And there's an app that I use called Index as well, where you can have an open public closet and you can show out any outfits that you've cataloged and anybody can go in and look at it. And I think it's really brought to the forefront of my mind this consumption. It's beyond just inspiration and seeing what other people are doing, but it's really wanting to be a part of how somebody uses their things and having a parasocial relationship with the use of other people's things has been a really interesting, unexpected experience for me.
Define parasocial.
I would like to consult Merriam-Webster here, but seeing as I don't have the dictionary available.
I think I understand, but it's such an interesting concept. And it's kind of what I'm just kind of interested at picking at here, which is this two-way, but it almost feels like a 1.5-way relationship where like you are putting yourself out there and I am consuming some of you, but it is this very interesting, sort of self-presentation.
Yeah, I would describe, and again, kids, consult Merriam-Webster. I don't know if this is the real definition, but my experience of a parasocial relationship, or what I think it is it's the relationship with your projection of a person, because we can't know each other the way that we want to. And maybe this case could be made for knowing people in person. I know you in a different way than your family does, et cetera, et cetera. But as it pertains like the limitations of online culture, especially with our obsession with authenticity and realness, whatever that means, I think parasocial
projected
relationships.
Authenticity.
Yeah, it's this like one-sided. I think of a parasocial relationship as one where you have a relationship with your idea of somebody, but you don't necessarily know them. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with those relationships, but it is interesting to reflect on what are the limitations of how much I can be connected to this person.
What is it like to walk into a room and know nothing about the person that you're sitting across from, but they have that idea of you because they have seen you, they have heard you, they have read you?
I've had a lot of interesting experiences with that. I like navigating it because I know also what it's like to be in that situation. I've been in rooms where I meet people that I know when their dog passed away and where they live and that they wear a specific jacket all the time and they don't know my first name. So I like sharing that experience. I like hearing what people have to say. I've heard people say, what is it exactly that you do? Where do you live? It's also weird to think that maybe you think that people know more about you than they do, or things that are obvious to you are not at all obvious to the person that's consuming you. So I guess I like being open to the experience of interacting with everyone's ideas of me and seeing where that takes them. I've had one-off comments. A few people have said, oh, I didn't know you were smart. I didn't know you went to college.
What do you make of that?
I think it's funny. I think that it's just good to remember that it doesn't really, maybe this is a little pessimistic or nihilistic, but it's a good exercise in relinquishing control. I think that online presentation, this obsession with authenticity, can drive people to try to be so authentic, and there really is no way to be authentic. You can be authentic in so many different circumstances. I've been authentic in the workplace, and I've been authentic with friends, and those are two completely different people. And so I think it's a good way to just remember that, consider the standards that we hold other people to, and thinking about the way that we experience each other. And going back to like ephemerality, some people experience you in 5 minutes of your entire life, and that's their whole idea of you. And some people have known you for 20 years, and those people are completely different people.
What is that quest for authenticity? That is a desire to know somebody, that is a desire to get through the veneer that we feel like we get. What is that to you?
I think I guess it sounds like a woo-woo. I don't know, a less spiritual hullabaloo type way to say this, but
woo.
I think
we've already talked about Ram Dass today.
For
we've
sure,
already talked about being here now. Let's go down the woo-woo rabbit hole.
Yeah, to quote Baba, I think it's just like being here now. What's the truth now? What's the reality now? And that's permittable to change is something that I emphasize a lot. I think a lot of people conflate, especially online, authenticity with integrity. And I think that are you doing what you're saying you're doing as part of it, but also what you're saying you're doing can change. And I think a lot of people, especially in a culture that relies more and more on like personal identity and tethering yourself to a brand. Even for the average corporate person on LinkedIn, we're all making ourselves into our own brands. And I think that change has become even scarier because of that. So I think that for me, authenticity just means allowing myself to, I think it would not be of integrity to hold myself to the standard of being somebody who works in a lab and has a science degree if that's no longer what I'm doing. That's not authentic. My definition of authenticity would be being who I am when I have changed and accepting that, and not holding myself to standards or niches or facades of a brand or personality that might not exist anymore. And I think that's difficult and it's confusing for people when you're online, but being alive is confusing and having relationships with people is confusing.
Well, and there is something to being open to where somebody is now, is a very authentic experience, right? If I have some idea of you that is based on some linearity of this is who you were yesterday, or this is how you were in this setting, I don't know, that there is something that is just, I have already, I don't know, I'm just thinking about that in terms of consumption, right? I have already bought you.
Yeah.
And I have bought a stagnant notion, or I've bought a static notion. And I'm still thinking back now about your comment about the turquoise ring from your mom. And it is more valuable to you 15 years after you lost it than when you had it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I've always thought about this in terms of, selling things. And I have often said the things that we sell are the least valuable at the moment when we sell it. And it is only by bringing it into your life that it takes on more value and that you kind of imbue something into it. And I never thought about it one degree beyond that, which is what you were saying earlier, which is it could be even more valuable even when you don't have it. And so, I don't know, I'm so fascinated by this idea of something that is material and not, right? It is the idea of the thing that is actually more important than the thing.
Yeah. And it was I thought that was it inspired a lot of thoughts for me around consumption and what does it mean to own something? Does it need to be material just because it's ephemeral, just because it's immaterial and intangible? How do we have ownership over those things? What makes a collection? You can also have a collection of values and thoughts and ideas. And I think materialism represents that in a lot of ways. I was inspired by Presley Oldham on his episode talking about wrapping wire on the faceted gemstones, and just the way that we make things in ways that we didn't used to says a lot about history and how we want to collect and how we view ourselves. Are we doing things that are completely nonsensical? He was saying those tactics are at odds with each other. It makes no sense to operate in that way. And I think even just me consuming him saying that is a way to think about getting dressed. How could I get dressed? How could I collect things in a way that makes absolutely no sense and is nonsensical just for the fun, for the whimsy of it? And that really impacted me and is a value and idea that I now own that's intangible without even owning a piece of his jewelry. So I think even these conversations are ways of being a materialist. I guess a life of consumption, a life of inputs. I don't know what it means to be a materialist, maybe.
What do you think about digital goods? I don't know where we are in the rise and fall of things like NFTs. And for a long time, there was all this talk of, collecting these tokens. And I think we've gotten beyond the world now of people paying enormous sums of money for, apes. But to this idea of collecting ideas, does that interest you?
I think it does. I feel both ways about it. I have no interest in discussing like NFTs, Web3, blockchain. That's out of my purview. But I do think it's interesting the resurgence or importance I've seen historians, librarians, archivists put on personal and digital archiving. I've seen funny videos. They're tongue-in-cheek, but I do think they have an importance for our future. With the looming potential TikTok ban, people have been downloading their TikToks and their data. And I think it's been interesting to see people do things like they've downloaded all of their 10-minute scroll of their For You page onto a VHS tape so you can memorialize that. And what does that look to mix cross-generational forms of archiving? And it is interesting that in the digital realm, there's the ability to do that, whereas it feels like other material subject matters were going on as normal. I don't know how to describe it. Like a necklace collection feels so, it can represent so many periods of history, so many tactics, so many things, but it feels very linear. And digital archiving it's interesting to me. I don't know what it looks like to collect that in the same way that I know how to collect shoes, bags, jewelry, and things beyond like a collection of files.
If you were going to build and open the Museum of Heather today, what would that look like?
Oh, that would be a very fun project. I would first try to get a loan to hire like Brian Eno to do some sort of lighting experiential exhibit. I would maybe want to have a chronological experience with different lenses. I'd want to have some material things that I own, but I think I would want to find some way to translate the feeling or the reason I felt when I owned those things and why they were important to me, whether that's a way to somehow make the feelings of fear or insecurity or striving tangible. I've really been enjoying experiential exhibits recently because I think it is, quote unquote, so easy to acquire things now in a culture of immediacy and disposability. If I can satisfy a material need pretty quickly with a dupe on Amazon and most people at a range of price points. And so I think I would want to focus mostly on experiences and find a way to translate those feelings into something that somebody else can feel would be really interesting to me. I don't know what that would look like.
What exhibits have you seen recently that have been thought-provoking, enjoyable?
Oh, Doug Wheeler had an exhibit at David's Werner called Day, Night, Day. And it was, I'm going to butcher the technical terms here, but I'll explain to you what I felt when I experienced it. It was a room and you turn the corner and you have no idea how big the room is. I don't know how he manipulated light and fog, and apparently there was no fog in the room. My boyfriend and I looked up how he did it, and apparently there was no fog machine in there, but it looked like it was foggy and like you were in this vast expanse. And it was funny to see everybody so cautious and fumbling around. I was there with two other women and all of us were walking with our hands out in front of us. And you could see the hesitance in all of our steps. Like we were afraid that there were panels in front of all of our faces we would just smash into. And you would reach the edge or the boundary of the room and you'd be going up a ramp. And you had no idea that there was even a ramp there. It looked like it was flat. And it was a really unsettling experience to be able to see and not be able to make any conclusions out of that. You weren't deprived of your vision or any of your senses, but you didn't know what to do with the space that you were in or able to navigate it confidently, which was an experience I haven't had in a really long time. Even if I'm wearing 6-inch heels on a slippery subway, I know how to get from point A to point B. So I really love that exhibit.
Are there things that you want to create?
Yes, I do have an idea for a product that I want to launch next year, and that's all I'll say about that.
Oh, yeah. ...
Yeah, a psychic told me to stop telling people so much of what I'm working on, so I'm going to heed her advice in that one realm.
It's always better to be mysterious and leave a little bit to the imagination.
Yeah, I'm rarely mysterious, so I figured I'd start now.
What else is inspiring you at the moment?
I've been reading I bought myself a JPass for Christmas, so you can download PDFs on JSTOR, and I've been really interested in the idea. I think a lot of people are...
Oh, wait, you're smart?
Yeah, I am literate.
You can read?
I can read. I am really interested right now in trying to break out of the binary. I love challenges everybody's doing around like decluttering, no buys and things like that, but I think in that way, consuming consumption can be another form of going down a path of addiction or just an obsession or maybe a use of time that you ultimately feel is not productive. So I've been trying to think of ways to reimagine these challenges around decluttering and no buys and things like that. And I think the typical way a lot of these things are framed just keep us in a cycle of consumption where it's actually the new rules are that you should keep this for 6 months. If you don't wear it in 6 months, get rid of it. And then you end up buying a new thing 6 months later. And there have been some really interesting and manipulative corporate and consumer studies about how things like interstitial space or lighting make products more appealing to us. And this is not new information, but I've been thinking about how to apply that in my home. So I've rearranged my house, things that I fell out of love with or loved at the time that I bought and debated decluttering. I'm like, okay, what if I can hang this so that it feels like I'm in a store and it's super special and there's more interstitial space around it or there's lighting around it.
You're manipulating yourself?
Yeah, like manipulating myself into enjoying my things more and using science to do that. If companies are going to manipulate us into arranging things so that we want to buy them, how can I manipulate myself into buying into the things that I've already bought? And reimagining my collection has been an interesting idea that I'm exploring, which is not novel. Use your things, love them, keep them. But I think cycles of consumption have accelerated alongside cycles of decluttering and expulsion. I'm interested in like, how can we not just keep things longer for the sake of keeping them longer, but again, reimagining the perspective of yourself. You can be a completely different person using the same things.
Who are people that inspire you?
Ooh. Something that makes me laugh, I don't know why this is the first thing that came to mind, is that Lauryn Hill just is late to all of her concerts. I think that's really funny for some reason. I know performing is like how people make money, but I enjoy that tidbit. I know a lot of people are very frustrated by it and it's rude, but I just like that. I think that's funny that I'm here to make music and I don't want to tour and I'm going to be late to all my concerts. I don't know if that necessarily inspires me, but that's the first thing that came to mind randomly. And then Brian Eno, I've been just reading a lot of his books. I like that he has a lot of ideas that sort of piss me off and I think are a little bit perverse. He published his diary in 1995 and then he re-released an edition of it in 2020. And there's a section called Unthinkable Futures where he details all of these like crazy versions of society that we could live in. And all of his sort of heuristics and thought exercises really inspire me. And my entrepreneurship professor in college, Jim Friedman, another person I haven't talked to in 5 years, and we had shared one semester together, but I think about him all the time. He was somebody who also really pissed me off. But
what did he say that pissed you off? And obviously, sort of got a burr under your saddle because you're still thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that I guess this also relates back to online culture, relatability culture, authenticity, what is quote unquote normal. He was just always suggesting these things that I was like, the heuristics and ways of living and thinking about things that I found super inconvenient and laborious and tedious. He had a bunch of rules, like in the classroom, if you're going to raise your hand, you had to give the second right answer. So you couldn't say the first thing that came to your mind. I don't know how you can quantify that or how he would know, but it was an unspoken code that like he could tell if you were just saying the first thing that you thought that came out of your mouth. He had us do all these crazy projects. My roommates would come home.
What was the thought behind that?
I think it was just the idea, can we explore, sometimes you should act on impulse, but sometimes can we go for maybe explore the worst idea? And Brian Eno has a similar philosophy. When he would work in the studio with David Bowie, there's like a famous anecdote that he tells where he had these cards that you could pull called oblique strategies. And whenever you got stuck, you would pull a card and it would take you in a different direction. And one day he pulled 2 cards. He and Bowie both pulled a card and didn't tell each other what they were, and then worked in the studio that day aligned with their cards. And Brian Eno's card said, start over all the time, scrap everything. And David Bowie's card said, stay the course no matter what. And so they're fighting the whole day in the studio, not knowing that they're both operating in these headspaces. And I think that's what my professor was getting at, was how can I not be myself, almost to understand myself in the way that I think about things? Because you can only really lead with intuition if you can trust your intuition and like understand what it is sometimes and be able to listen to that unspoken. So I think that's what he was trying to get us to tap into. But I thought it was so annoying. I was like, dude, I don't have time for this. I'm a student. Why are you making me do all this extra tedious work that quote unquote amounts to nothing in productivity culture? I'm writing grants about like how to get people to stop smoking cigarettes and then going and finger painting at 9 a.m. It didn't feel important at the time, but I think that was so impactful to me. I would say, yeah, usually I'm inspired by the things that are the most sticky to me, or just things that I find annoying or stupid or boring, or things that I go in blind. My mom and I would buy tickets to concerts a lot for people that we had never heard of just to see what it was about. And those ended up being some artists that I liked the most, just because you don't have any preconceived notions. You're not worried about the ticket being like worth the money you spent on it. You're just like, it's $25. Let's see what we're going to see.
Yeah. There was a great book that I loved called An Economist Goes to Lunch.
I'll have to read it.
And he was a George Mason economist who was optimizing solely for food quality. But his thing was, go to a great restaurant and order the thing on the menu that sounds the worst to you, because there's a reason that it is there.
Yeah.
And the chef wants you to try this. And like, all right, everybody's going to have a chicken and everybody's going to have a steak, but something that is strange, that does not have an innate appeal, is going to be interesting. And you might not like it, but it's also the thing that is most likely to blow your mind. Because like, all right, I know what a good steak is. I know what a bad steak is. I know what a great steak is. But like, how many bulgogis have I had? Yeah,
I like that idea.
Yeah.
I think it ties to Jenny Holzer has the famous quote from one of her exhibits, protect me from what I want. I do appreciate a steadfastness in someone who, my roommate, my best friend and I are complete opposites. She's had oatmeal every single morning for the last 10 years for breakfast, dutifully consumes it. And I like that's a core tenet and difference of our personalities, that she's someone who will repeat in that way and I'm someone who will stray, and neither of us are able to live the experience of the opposite just because that's who we are. I'm going to miss out on being a steak connoisseur and knowing what that's like to know what a good steak is, because I am always ordering a random thing that I might regret. I did go to there's a sushi place in the subway station in Brooklyn Heights. I did eat there. It was gross. But now I can say that I did try the 4 out of 5 star sushi place in the subway station.
And it could be Jiro, who is the most masterful sushi chef in the world, who's in the Ginza train station in Tokyo. I didn't prepare you for this, but I think you've listened to enough episodes to know that one of the things that I like to ask are for 3 makers, artists, intellectuals, things that people should know that they don't know about.
Oh, yes. New to me, I won't count this as one of my 3, but I've loved James Banks' design, fallen absolutely in love with them after their episode. And those wooden boxes live in my mind rent-free. If you can tag those in the show notes, beautiful wooden boxes that I think Heidi's son makes. Mm-hmm. Stunning. That I think about that Heidi's husband makes. I think about those all the time. They're gorgeous. I show those boxes to anyone who will listen. I think that packaging is really exciting, good for longevity. Artist-wise, there's a sculptor local to Nashville named Vadis Turner who makes these beautiful, almost like Stranger Things looking sculptures that I really enjoy. There's a woman named Wretched Flowers who makes beautiful chainmail curtains, weaving in like a coquettish lace curtain energy with a Joan of Arc material, which I think is very fun and transformative. And in the jewelry realm, I really like a small maker. Jewelry is not his full-time job, which I think is especially interesting for his business because his jewelry is so beautiful. Eli Birch is based in Connecticut. All of his jewelry has a hammered quality to it, which I really like. It feels organic. It feels like a friend could have made it for you. And then Fran Hoskin, I love if you're familiar with her. She has a really interesting story. She was a radical feminist who is credited with coining the term female genital mutilation. I don't know if I can say that on the podcast. Feel free to edit it out.
The censors, I think, will allow that.
Great. Okay.
Yeah,
but yeah, she was a badass. She's super cool. And a friend of mine, Charlotte von Hardenberg, is a researcher into cool dead women, is what she calls herself. And Dorothy Liebs, who's a really cool textilist, and then Fran Hoskin are just these really amazing women. Fran was an industrial designer and trained under Bauhaus and made jewelry out of copper and wire and just simple, cheap materials on a lathe with this really interesting technique that the jewelry seems very simple. At the time, she was selling it for $3 a pop, super cheap, but just a really interesting story. So I like anybody who's really articulating things. More contemporarily, Mon Bouquet Jewelry, who I believe at present carries, ?
We love them.
Yeah, I love Lily. I think she's great. Her mind is fun. I like her ideas. She has a ring that spins open. You can store just one Advil in, which is perfect.
Yeah. We love Lily and Jenny, her mom.
Yeah.
Do wonderful things.
They're a cool duo.
For those who want to engage with you, consume you,
sure.
Where can they find you, and what are they going to find on each of these platforms?
I can't promise what you're going to find, or at least on Instagram. Instagram is a shot in the dark in terms of what I'm feeling that day, but I am Pig Mommy on Instagram. My dog's name is Pig. I would have chosen a different name if I knew that this was going to go anywhere. But it's
sometimes path dependence.
I've tried to change it and I've been bullied into changing it back. So here we are. It's PIGMAMI on Instagram. And then my Substack is called Pigpen. That's more of a directed effort. It's philosophical inspirations and like lines of inquiry into desire, dressing, decor, the ways that we adorn ourselves and interact with things. And there's some more pragmatic tips on there. I love secondhand sourcing. So there's a lot of eBay roundups and some subscriber questions around how to style sticky pieces and things like that. And that is Pigpen on Substack, which is a triple entendre. I'm a messy person. My dog's name is Pig, and I'm penning.
And by the time this comes out, this may or may not exist, but you're also on TikTok.
Yeah, I didn't even mention that because I figured I was...
This might be going off into the ether.
My Pig Mommy gravestone cake is baking in the oven as we speak.
Have you downloaded all your content?
Pig Mommy on TikTok. I have the TXT files, but I have some work to do today on converting. My Dropbox is about to be stacked full of... It's about to run out my gigabytes.
How do you feel about that?
TikTok going away?
Yeah.
I'm actually excited for it. In a macro sense, I am sad because I think there's going to be devastating consequences for contributions to the economy that are intangible to the government in terms of small businesses and the ways that creators influence the buying of products and consumerism, for better or for worse. But on a micro scale, I'm excited about it. I think change is inevitable. And I've wanted to explore a new medium or change the way that I've been doing things. And I actually had a psychic tell me last year, she said, you're going to lose a big part of your identity in your job late January 2025, which is creepy. Or maybe she just had some government intel that I didn't have and knew that I was a TikToker somehow. But I'm excited. I think new doors. I don't know.
Are there new platforms that you're exploring? Are there interesting conversations happening somewhere?
Not necessarily new platforms, but I'm excited to dive deeper into Substack, experiment more with live, and collaborate. I do a lot of studio visits with artists privately, and I'm excited to publicize some of them. Marcus Leslie Singleton is another great painter that I love who's based in Brooklyn. He likes to fly fish. I think there's a lot of cool stuff we would do there. What jewelry does someone who's fly fishing wear? And there's those pragmatic hang-ups too that I really enjoy. Like when I was in the lab and wearing gloves all the time, my ring use sort of suffered because I couldn't do that as much and I didn't have long nails and things like that. So I'm always interested in the pragmatic aspects of people's work and how that interacts with the way that they adorn themselves. So I'm excited to explore different ways of having the same conversation versus colonizing new technologies.
Heather Hurst, thank you.
I love it, Mark. It's a pleasure.
Such a joy. That's it for today's episode of The Materialist. A huge thank you to Heather Hurst for sharing her unique perspective on collecting curiosity and the evolving relationship we have with the things we own. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure to follow Heather at Pigmommy and check out her Substack, Pigpen, for more insightful thoughts on style and storytelling. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review The Materialist wherever you get your podcasts. The Materialist is a production of At Present, Matchmaker to Extraordinary Jewelry.